The letter promised Ania Washington a factory. It failed to mention the building was a tomb, sealed for 60 years, filled with enough asbestos to poison a city, and that deep in its concrete heart, a vault held a secret worth $500 million. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to join our community and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now back to Ania's story. The paper felt alien in her hands. Its thick, creamy stock, a relic from an era before flimsy bills and digital notices. It was the kind of paper that meant something, heavy with the gravity of law and time. Nia traced the embossed letterhead of a law firm she'd never heard of, a name with three severe Anglo-Saxon surnames linked by ampersands. She stood in the cramped hallway of her apartment, the scent of her neighbor's overcooked cabbage seeping under the door, a smell she associated with the end of the month. Her son, Marcus, was in his room, the soft, repetitive chime of his video game, a fragile shield against the world outside. The letter spoke of a man named Silas Washington, her great-uncle, a name that was only a whisper in the fog of her family's history, a branch of the tree that had withered and fallen off long before she was born. He had passed, the letter stated in sterile terms, and she, Ania Grace Washington, was his sole heir. The inheritance was listed simply, the property and all contents located at 1412 Industrial Way, formerly the Monarch Typewriter Company. Ania read the line again. A factory. Not a house, not a savings account, not a dusty collection of stocks and bonds. A factory. A whole building made of brick and steel and forgotten promises. Laughter, sharp and humorless, escaped her lips. It was a joke. It had to be. A cruel, elaborate prank sent to the wrong address. People like her didn't inherit factories. People like her inherited debt, worry, and the bone-deep weariness of a life lived on the knife's edge of solvency. She worked 2 jobs, stocking shelves at a grocery store before the sun rose and cleaning office buildings after it set, to keep this small, 2-bedroom apartment, to keep Marcus in good sneakers, to keep the lights on. The second notice bill for the electricity was on the small table by the door, its red lettering a silent scream. And now this. A key was taped to the bottom of the letter, heavy and ornate, a skeleton key of black iron. It looked like it belonged to a castle in a fairy tale, not a derelict building in the city's decaying industrial sector. She held it in her palm, its cold weight a stark, physical reality against the flimsy absurdity of the letter. This was real. The weight was real. She thought about ignoring it, tossing the letter and the key into the trash, dismissing it as a phantom limb of a family she never knew. It was easier, safer. Hope was a dangerous thing, a flickering candle in a hurricane. But then she heard Marcus laugh, a genuine, joyful sound from his room, and the thought of his future, a future she was fighting for with every aching muscle, solidified her resolve. What if? The question was a tiny seed, but it fell on fertile ground. The next day, a Saturday, she left Marcus with her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose kindness was as pungent as her cooking. Ania took the bus, the city unfolding outside the grimy window, the gleaming towers of downtown giving way to low-slung warehouses, and then, finally, to the skeletal remains of the industrial district. The bus wheezed to a stop at a deserted corner. The air here tasted different, metallic and tinged with the bitterness of rust and neglect. And there it was, 1412 Industrial Way. It wasn't a factory. It was a fortress, a monument to a dead industry. 4 stories of soot-stained brick, its windows boarded up or shattered into 1,000 blind eyes. The name was still visible, faded but defiant. Ghost white letters painted on the brick. Monarch Typewriter Company. It consumed the entire block, a silent, brooding giant sleeping off a century of noise and motion. Weeds grew thick and tenacious from cracks in the pavement. A chain-link fence, sagging and crowned with rust, offered a pathetic pretense of security. The gate was held shut by a thick, corroded chain and a padlock that looked as old as the building itself. Ania stood on the broken sidewalk, the city's hum, a distant murmur, and felt an overwhelming sense of insignificance. She was a single woman in a worn coat, holding a fairy tale key, standing before a behemoth that had swallowed men, machines, and decades whole. The scale of it was terrifying. The sheer dumb reality of it, this was hers. This mountain of decay, this mausoleum of ambition. She approached the gate, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The key from the letter was for the front door, she presumed, but first she had to get past the fence. She pulled on the chain. The links groaned, flaking rust onto her hands, but held firm. For a moment, she was ready to turn back, to accept the absurdity and go home. But the weight of the key in her pocket was a constant reminder. She walked the perimeter of the fence, her sneakers crunching on broken glass. In the back, near a loading dock choked with debris, she found a section where the fence had collapsed inward, creating a narrow, jagged gap. It was an invitation, a dangerous one. She hesitated, looking back at the empty street. No one was watching. No one cared. This place had been forgotten by everyone but a dead man and a lawyer. She took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs, and squeezed through the gap, tearing her coat on a shard of metal. She was in. The ground inside was a treacherous landscape of rubble and weeds. The air was heavy, still. The silence was the most unsettling part. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of the suburbs. It was the profound, deafening silence of abandonment, of a place where thousands of sounds had once lived and then, suddenly, died. She made her way to the main entrance, a pair of colossal oak doors with iron fittings. A brass plaque, green with age, read simply, S. Washington Pro P. Silas, her great-uncle, the man who had left her this impossible, terrifying legacy. She pulled the iron key from her pocket. Her hand trembled as she slid it into the lock. It was a perfect fit. The tumblers inside the lock were stiff, frozen with years of disuse. She put her shoulder into it, gritting her teeth, turning the key with all her strength. There was a hideous, grinding shriek of metal on metal, a sound that echoed in the unnatural quiet. And then, a deep, resonant click that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The door was unlocked. For a long moment, she just stood there, her hand on the cold iron handle, her breath pluming in the air. Behind this door was the unknown. It could be a crushing disappointment, a hollow shell filled with nothing but rats and asbestos. Or it could be something else. It was the not knowing that was both terrifying and intoxicating. She thought of Marcus, of the red-lettered bill on her table, of the endless cycle of exhaustion and worry. Whatever was in here, it had to be better than the certainty of her current life. She pulled the door. It moved slowly, groaning on its hinges, opening a sliver of profound darkness into the gray afternoon. The air that rushed out was a physical presence, a wave of cold, musty air that smelled of oil, metal, and time itself. It was the smell of a sealed tomb. Ania Washington took a step forward, leaving the world she knew behind, and walked into the darkness. Ania stepped across the threshold and the world shifted. The heavy oak door swung shut behind her with a deep, final boom that echoed through the cavernous space, plunging her into near total darkness. The sudden absence of light was disorienting, a physical weight that pressed in on her. The air was thick, suffocating, a cocktail of scents that had been brewing in the dark for 60 years. The sharp tang of mineral oil, the faint, acrid smell of old chemicals, and underneath it all, a dry, chalky odor she couldn't place. It was the smell of dust, but not ordinary dust. This was the dust of decay, the powdered remains of everything the factory had once been. Her eyes struggled to adjust. Faint slivers of gray light penetrated the grime-caked windows high above, revealing the sheer, terrifying scale of the place. She was standing on a mezzanine overlooking the main factory floor. Below her, an ocean of shadows stretched out, a vast, silent landscape of machinery. The silence was absolute, a living entity that hummed in her ears. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of sound, the phantom clang of presses, the chatter of 1,000 type bars, the shouts of men. Now there was nothing, just the sound of her own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of her heart. She fumbled for her phone, its small screen a defiant beacon in the oppressive gloom. She turned on the flashlight, and the beam cut a sharp, nervous path through the darkness. The light swept across the factory floor, and Anaya gasped. It was a city frozen in time, rows upon rows of workstations stretched into the distance, each one a small tableau of uninterrupted work. On a conveyor belt, the half-assembled bodies of Monarch typewriters sat in perfect silent procession, waiting for hands that would never return. Tools were laid out on workbenches as if the craftsman had just stepped away for lunch. Wrenches, calipers, tiny hammers, all coated in a thick, uniform blanket of gray dust. Spools of ribbon, their colors long faded, sat in their boxes. A coffee mug, stained and empty, rested on the edge of a desk. It was Pompeii, but for industry. An entire world, flash frozen on a single ordinary day in what must have been the early 1960s. The sight was both magnificent and deeply unsettling. Anaya felt like an intruder, a grave robber trespassing in a place of rest. She moved slowly along the mezzanine, her footsteps echoing unnervingly in the vast space. The beam of her phone caught something on the wall. A sign. Its paint was peeling, the letters faded, but the words were still legible. Warning, asbestos dust hazard. Avoid creating dust. Respiratory protection required in this area. Her blood ran cold. Stom, asbestos, the chalky smell, the thick, settled dust. It wasn't just dust, it was poison. Every surface, every machine, every inch of the air was likely saturated with microscopic, deadly fibers. She instinctively pulled the collar of her coat up over her nose and mouth. A futile gesture. She should leave. Right now. She should turn around, walk out that door, lock it, and throw the key into the nearest river. The city could have the building. Let them deal with the poisoned tomb. But her feet remained planted on the steel floor. The image of the half-finished typewriters of that lonely coffee mug held her captive. This place wasn't just a hazard, it was a story. Her family's story. And the thought of turning her back on it felt like a betrayal of something she didn't even understand yet. The pull of the mystery, the whisper of what might be hidden here, was stronger than her fear. She had to know more. She had to understand why her great-uncle had sealed this place up like a pharaoh's tomb instead of selling it, cleaning it, or simply letting it go. She continued along the mezzanine, her light dancing ahead of her, picking out details from the gloom. She found a door marked Foreman's Office. It was unlocked. Inside, a heavy wooden desk sat facing a large window that overlooked the entire factory floor. A throne room for a king of industry. A calendar on the wall was turned to October 1963. A single date was circled in red ink, the 22nd. What happened on that day? Was that the day the world stopped inside these walls? She ran her finger through the dust on the desk, revealing the dark, rich wood beneath. This was where he worked. Silas. She tried to picture him, a man she'd never seen, sitting here, watching over his kingdom of steel and ink. She felt a strange connection, a thread of kinship stretching across the 60 years of silence. The rational part of her mind was screaming, a frantic alarm bell warning of the danger she was breathing with every shallow gasp of air. But another part, a deeper, more desperate part, urged her on. The part that was tired of being afraid, tired of scraping by. The part that looked at this vast, silent, dangerous inheritance and saw not a liability, but a chance. A terrifying, monumental chance. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she couldn't walk away. Not yet. She had to see it through. She had to find the heart of this place, the reason for its sudden death. Her decision made, a strange calm settled over her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now accompanied by a steely resolve. She would be careful. She would find a proper mask. She would learn about the dangers. But she would not be scared away. This factory was hers. The poison, the mystery, the silence. It all belonged to Anaya Washington now, and she was not going to let it go until it gave up its secrets. She stepped out of the foreman's office, her phone's light feeling a little less like a nervous flicker and a little more like a determined searchlight. She pointed it towards a stairwell at the far end of the mezzanine, a stairwell that led up into the administrative heart of the sleeping giant. The secrets, she felt, were not on the factory floor among the silent machines. They were upstairs where the decisions were made, where the man who left her this legacy had lived his life and, perhaps, orchestrated its end. She started walking towards the stairs, her shadow long and distorted behind her, a lone, living thing in a world of the dead. The climb up the steel staircase was a journey through layers of silence. Each step rang out with a sharp, metallic clang that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before being swallowed by the immense, dust-choked void. The air grew colder, thinner as she ascended, the chalky smell of asbestos more pronounced. Ania kept the collar of her coat pressed tightly to her face, her breath shallow and deliberate. It was a poor defense, she knew, but it was all she had. The second floor was a maze of smaller offices, a bureaucratic warren that had once supported the industrial heart below. Doors stood ajar, revealing desks littered with papers, typewriters shrouded in their vinyl covers, and Rolodexes fat with forgotten contacts. In the beam of her phone, the dust motes danced like frantic, microscopic spirits. It felt profoundly wrong to be here, to disturb the perfect stillness. This entire floor was a shrine to the mundane, to the everyday business of a world that no longer existed. She passed a break room. A row of vending machines stood against one wall, their glass fronts cloudy with grime, their contents ancient candy bars and bags of chips, still visible within, petrified and pale. An old boxy television sat in the corner, its screen a blank gray eye. This was where people had laughed, complained, shared gossip. Now it was as silent as a crypt. Anya was looking for one office in particular, the one that must have belonged to the man in charge, to Silas Washington. She found it at the end of the main corridor, set apart from the others. Double doors of dark, polished mahogany, a stark contrast to the painted steel of the others. A single brass plate, tarnished but legible, bore his name, S. Washington President. This was the nerve center, the heart of the Monarch Typewriter Company. She pushed the door open. It swung inward without a sound, a testament to its quality. The office was enormous, occupying the entire corner of the building. Two of its walls were vast, floor-to-ceiling windows that would have offered a commanding view of the city's industrial life. Now they were just massive, grimy rectangles that barely admitted the dying afternoon light. A huge mahogany desk, clear of any clutter, dominated the room. Behind it, a high-backed leather chair faced the windows, its back to the door, as if its occupant were still sitting there, contemplating his empire. Anaya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the posture of the chair, the expectant emptiness of it. She walked around the desk, half expecting to see someone, a ghost, a skeleton, sitting there. The chair was empty. Of course it was. But the impression of a presence was so strong it made the hairs on her arms stand up. The office was Spartan, almost monastic. There were no personal trinkets, no family photos, just a desk, the chair, a row of tall filing cabinets against one wall, and a single large object standing in the corner, covered by a canvas drop cloth. The lack of personality was itself a statement. This was a place of work, of power, of singular focus. Ania ran her light over the filing cabinets. They were all locked. She tried the desk drawers. Locked. Everything was sealed, secured. Silas Washington had not been a man who left things to chance. Her light fell upon the object in the corner. Curiosity overpowering her caution, she reached out and pulled away the dusty canvas cover. Underneath was a portrait, a life-size oil painting of a man in a severe, dark suit. He stood with one hand resting on a Monarch typewriter, his gaze direct and piercing. He was a handsome man with sharp features, dark, intelligent eyes, and a jaw set with unyielding determination. His skin was the same deep, rich brown as her own. It was the first time she had ever seen his face. Silas Washington, her great-uncle. There was an undeniable family resemblance in the set of his eyes, the high cheekbones. But there was a hardness in his expression that she didn't recognize in herself, a look of profound authority and deep, unshakable conviction. He looked like a man who could build an empire and, if necessary, bury it. Anaya felt a connection that went beyond mere blood. She saw in his face a reflection of her own stubbornness, her own will to survive. But his was magnified, forged in a different fire. Who was this man? Why had he built all of this, only to lock it away? She turned her attention back to the desk. Though the surface was clear, she noticed a small, almost invisible seam in the leather inlay near the back. She pressed on it. A section of the desktop popped up with a soft click, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment. Her heart leaped. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were two items: a small, leather-bound journal and a single, intricately designed brass key, much smaller than the one for the front door. She picked up the journal. The leather was supple, the pages edged in gold. It felt personal, important. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, precise, the ink a faded black. The first entry was dated January 1st, 1963. The year of the reckoning, it began. The world believes itself to be on a path of endless progress, but the foundations are rotten. The systems they have built, the banks, the governments, are designed to concentrate power, to strip wealth, to ensure that men like me, no matter how high we build, can be brought low by a stroke of their pen. They will not have what is mine. They will not have what belongs to my family, to the future. I have built a fortress, not of brick and steel, but of principle. The monarch is more than a company. It is an ark, and the storm is coming. Aeneas sank into the leather chair behind the desk, the journal in her hands. The leather creaked under her weight, the first sound it had made in 60 years. The words on the page were not the ramblings of a madman. They were the cold, calculated pronouncements of a visionary or a paranoiac. He wrote of his distrust of financial institutions, of the precariousness of black wealth in America, of his belief that true independence required complete separation from a corrupt system. He spoke of a legacy, a safeguard, a final measure to protect what he had built for a generation he would never meet. He was talking about her. This whole place, this silent poison factory, was a message in a bottle, a time capsule of wealth and warning sent across 60 years of history directly to her. The key, she now realized, was not for a desk or a filing cabinet. It was for something far more important. The journal was the map, and the key was for the treasure chest. The ghost in the machine wasn't a ghost at all. It was an architect, a protector, and he had left her the plans. She looked up at the portrait of Silas Washington, his painted eyes seeming to watch her, to judge her. The weight of his gaze, of his words, of this entire impossible inheritance settled upon her. This was no longer just a building. It was a mantle, a burden, a profound and terrifying responsibility. The next few days were a blur of clandestine activity. Aeneas moved as if in a dream, her two lives running on parallel tracks that she desperately tried to keep from colliding. By day, she was the same Aeneas, stocking shelves in the cold, fluorescent glare of the grocery store, her movements automatic, her mind 1,000 miles away inside a silent factory. By night, after Marcus was asleep, she sat at her small kitchen table, the dim light glinting off the brass key, the leather journal open before her. She devoured Silas's words, each entry a piece of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. He wrote with a chilling clarity about his plans. He had spent years converting the company's liquid assets into untraceable, non-sequential bearer bonds in physical gold. He detailed his acquisition of patents for engineering concepts decades ahead of their time, designs for more efficient engines, new metallurgical formulas, rudimentary schematics for what sounded like data storage. He believed that true wealth wasn't just money, but knowledge and ownership. He had created a repository, a modern-day pyramid to house his dynasty's treasures, hidden from what he called the grasping hands of the state in the jealous eyes of the market. But his entries grew more cryptic as he neared October 1963. He wrote of the final preparations, of sealing the heart, of a great silence that must fall. He never explicitly stated what was in the vault or where it was, but the journal was filled with clues disguised as philosophical musings, dates from family history, and complex mechanical equations. It was a test, she realized. He hadn't just left her a fortune. He had left her a challenge to prove she was worthy of it, that she had the intellect and the will to follow his path. Her first practical step was to address the immediate physical danger. She spent $50 she couldn't afford on a high-grade respirator mask and a disposable hazmat suit at a hardware store. The purchase felt both surreal and deeply serious. The first time she suited up inside the factory doors, the plastic crinkling with her every move, the world viewed through a plastic faceplate, she felt like an astronaut exploring a dead planet. The respirator hissed with each breath, a lonely, mechanical sound in the profound quiet. Armed with this meager protection, she began to explore in earnest the journal her guide. But her secret world was about to be breached. One afternoon, returning from her shift, she found it taped to her apartment door. A bright orange notice. Her stomach plummeted. It was an official stop work order and notice of violation from the city's Environmental Protection Department. The words leaped out at her: unlawful entry, condemned property, severe biohazard, friable asbestos. The notice demanded the property owner contact a Ms. Genevieve Albright within 48 hours, under penalty of fines and legal action. They knew. Someone had seen her. A neighbor, perhaps, who noticed the broken fence. The anonymity she had relied on was gone. The world, with its rules and its grasping hands, had found her. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. She had pictured a slow, methodical treasure hunt. Instead, she was now on a clock, a timer set by the very bureaucracy Silas had so deeply mistrusted. The next morning, her hands trembling, she made the call. The voice on the other end was exactly as she had imagined: crisp, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. Ms. Albright agreed to meet her at the factory that afternoon. Ania arrived early, standing outside the rusted fence, feeling like a child about to be scolded. A sleek, black city-owned sedan pulled up precisely at the appointed time. A woman emerged, tall and severe in a gray pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a tight, unforgiving bun. Genevieve Albright did not look like a woman who tolerated excuses. "Ms. Washington," she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "You understand the gravity of the situation?" Ania nodded, her own voice caught in her throat. "This building," Albright continued, gesturing toward the factory with a sweep of her hand, as if dismissing it, "is one of the most significant environmental hazards in the tri-state area. The level of airborne friable asbestos is catastrophic. It was scheduled for state-funded demolition in 5 years. Your appearance as the heir complicates things." Complicates things. Ania felt a surge of anger. This was her property, her legacy. To this woman, it was just a complication on a docket. "What does that mean?" Ania asked, her voice stronger than she expected. Albright gave her a look of faint pity, the kind one reserves for a particularly naive insect. "It means the cost of remediation, the legal mandated process of removing the asbestos, is estimated at between $15 and $20 million. Unless you can produce a certified check for that amount, the city will move to seize the property under the Environmental Domain Act. We will declare it a public nuisance, condemn it, and take possession to ensure public safety." $15 million. The number was so fantastically large, it was meaningless. It was like being told she owed the moon. Ania's hope, which had been a fragile flame, sputtered. This was the trap. This was the system Silas had written about. A system that could use its own rules to take everything from you. "How long do I have?" Ania asked, the words tasting like ash. "The preliminary seizure hearing is in 30 days, Albright said, checking her watch, as if this conversation was already taking up too much of her valuable time. "Our office will file the petition at the end of the month. You'll be notified. I'd advise you to consult with an attorney, though frankly, in cases like this, it's merely a formality." She handed Ania a business card and a thick packet of legal documents. "Do not enter the building again, Ms. Washington. The next time you will be arrested for trespassing on a condemned site." With that, she turned, got back into her car, and drove away, leaving Ania standing on the broken sidewalk with the orange notice of her defeat fluttering in her hand. 30 days. She had 30 days to solve a 60-year-old mystery, find a fortune she wasn't even sure existed, and fight a city that had already decided she had lost. The weight of it was crushing. She looked up at the factory, at the boarded windows, and the soot-stained brick. It no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a tomb, and the walls were closing in. For the first time, she truly understood the paranoia in Silas's journal. He hadn't been afraid of phantom enemies. He had been afraid of women like Genevieve Albright, of the calm, bureaucratic certainty of a system that could swallow a man's entire life's work and call it a complication. The fight was no longer about hope or curiosity. It was about survival. It was her against them. And she had 29 days left. Desperation is a powerful fuel. The city's ultimatum had transformed Ania's quest from a cautious exploration into a frantic, high-stakes race against time. The 30-day deadline hung over her like a guillotine's blade. The factory, once a place of mystery, was now enemy territory, and Ms. Albright was the face of the forces Silas had warned her about. Ania knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help. She needed someone who understood the factory, someone who had been there when its heart was still beating. She spent 2 days at the city's main library, poring over microfiche archives of old newspapers and city directories from the 1950s and early 60s. She searched for any mention of the Monarch Typewriter Company, for lists of employees, for anything that could give her a lead. The work was tedious, her eyes aching from the strain of the glowing green text. Finally, she found it. A small article from a 1962 business journal profiling Monarch's success, featuring a photograph of Silas Washington standing with his senior staff. One name was listed in the caption: Floor Manager Elias Henderson. An internet search for a man of that name who would now be in his late 80s or early 90s yielded a single hopeful result. An Elias Henderson living in a small, tidy house in one of the city's older, forgotten neighborhoods. A place of modest bungalows and proud, aging residents. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. Ania drove her sputtering, decade-old car to the address that Saturday. The house was small, with a neatly kept garden and a painted porch swing. She knocked on the door, her heart hammering. After a long moment, the door opened a few inches, held by a brass chain. An elderly man with kind, weary eyes and skin like wrinkled parchment peered out at her. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Mr. Henderson," Ania began, her voice uncertain. "My name is Ania Washington. I believe you used to work for my great-uncle, Silas Washington, at the Monarch factory." The man's eyes widened slightly. He looked her up and down, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just surprise in his gaze. He slowly unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. "Silas," he said, the name an incantation from a distant past. "I haven't heard that name in a long, long time. Come in, child. Come in." He led her into a living room filled with the comfortable clutter of a long life. Books, photographs, and the faint scent of lemon polish. He moved slowly with the careful deliberation of age, but his mind seemed sharp, his eyes missing nothing. They sat, and Ania, feeling a strange mix of hope and trepidation, told him everything. The letter, the key, the sealed factory, the asbestos, the journals, and the city's 30-day deadline. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his hands clasped over the head of a wooden cane, his expression unreadable. When she finished, a long silence filled the room. "I always wondered what he did," Mr. Henderson said at last, his voice soft. "We all came to work that Tuesday, October 22nd, and the gates were locked. A sign said the factory was closed, permanently. No warning, no explanation. He paid us all a generous severance, more than fair, but he vanished, just locked the doors and walked away from it all." "Why?" Ania pressed. "Do you have any idea why he would do that, Mr.?" Henderson looked out the window, his gaze distant. "Silas was a brilliant man, a genius, but he saw the world differently. He saw rot where others saw progress. He used to say the banks were printing money on phantom presses, that the whole system was a house of cards. He trusted in things he could touch: steel, gold, land. He called the factory his ark. He was preparing for a flood he saw coming." The word ark sent a shiver down Ania's spine. It was the same word from the journal. "He was a good man," Henderson continued, turning his gaze back to Ania. "A hard man, but a good one. He gave jobs to hundreds of folks from the neighborhood when no one else would. He believed in building something that would last, something for his people, for his family." Ania showed him the journal. He traced the elegant handwriting with a gnarled finger, a sad smile on his lips. "That's Silas, all right, always thinking 10 moves ahead." She then showed him the small brass key. Mr. Henderson stared at it for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I've seen this before," he murmured, "or something like it. He was always tinkering down in the sub-basement. Said he was working on a regulator for the building's foundation. Kept everyone out, even me." The sub-basement? Ania asked, her pulse quickening. The blueprints I found in his office only show one basement level. Ah, Henderson said with a knowing look. The city's blueprints. Silas had his own. He was always making modifications, adding things the inspectors never knew about. He built that place like a fortress from the bedrock up. The entrance, he used to talk about the heart of the monarch. Said you had to go through the belly of the beast to get to it. He closed his eyes, searching his memory. The boiler room, in the main basement. There was an old coal chute sealed up since they converted to gas in the 50s. He was always working back there. Always. The clue was cryptic, but it was more than Ania had before. A hidden place. A secret entrance. Mr. Henderson, Anaya said, her voice filled with a desperate plea. The city is going to take it. They're going to tear it all down. I only have a few weeks. The old man looked at her, and in her eyes, he saw the same fire, the same stubborn determination he had seen in her great-uncle 60 years ago. He saw the future Silas had been planning for. He rose slowly from his chair and walked over to a heavy wooden chest in the corner of the room. He rummaged inside for a moment before pulling out a long, rolled-up tube of yellowed paper, tied with a faded ribbon. Silas gave this to me the week before he closed the factory, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He said I should hold on to it, that one day someone might come looking for it. A Washington. He told me to give it to the one who had his eyes. He unrolled the paper on the coffee table. It was a blueprint. Not a city-filed architectural plan, but a hand-drawn schematic filled with Silas's own precise annotations and calculations. It showed the main basement, the boiler room, and there, behind the wall where the old coal chute would have been, was a small, shaded area marked with a single cryptic symbol, a crown, the logo of the Monarch Typewriter Company, and leading from it, a narrow passage, descending deeper into the earth. That's it, Mr. Henderson whispered, his finger tracing the lines. That's the way to the heart. Ania stared at the blueprint, at the path into the unknown depths of the factory. It was a map to her salvation, or her doom. She now had a guide, a mentor, and a map, but the path it revealed led deeper into the darkness, into the most dangerous, poison-filled recesses of the silent giant. The blueprint was a living document, a ghost whispering instructions from the past. Ania spent an entire night with it, spread across her kitchen floor, cross-referencing it with the frantic, paranoid poetry of Silas's journal. The path was clear, but it was not easy. The entrance to the sub-basement, the true heart of the factory, was hidden in the deepest, most hazardous part of the building. The descent was not just a physical journey, it was a psychological one, a plunge into the literal and metaphorical underbelly of her inheritance. She returned to the factory the next day, her sense of purpose a sharp, cold blade cutting through her fear. Dressed in her full hazmat suit, the respirator transforming her breathing into the rhythmic hiss of the deep-sea diver, she felt utterly alone, a solitary explorer in a hostile environment. She made her way through the frozen city of the main floor, her flashlight beam a nervous insect darting through the shadows. The silence seemed heavier now, more menacing, as if the building itself knew she was about to trespass on its deepest secret. She found the stairs to the basement easily enough, a wide concrete set of steps near the massive, silent freighted elevators. As she descended, the air grew thick and damp. The chalky smell of asbestos was mingled with the earthy scent of mildew and decay. The basement was a different world from the factory floor above. It was a labyrinth, a tangled gut of pipes, conduits, and machinery. Massive boilers, cold and silent for decades, stood like iron idols in the gloom. The ceiling was low, crisscrossed with enormous pipes wrapped in what looked like fraying white insulation. Ania knew what it was: pure asbestos lagging, the most dangerous kind. She moved with extreme care, trying not to disturb anything, not to brush against a wall or a pipe. Every surface was coated in the thick gray poison. The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a sprawling subterranean jungle. Water dripped from a leaky pipe somewhere in the distance, the sound unnervingly loud, a frantic, irregular heartbeat in the tomb-like silence. According to Mr. Henderson's blueprint, the old coal chute was in the far corner of the main boiler room. She navigated the maze of machinery, her gloved hands held tightly at her sides, her head on a constant swivel. The place felt predatory. The shadows thrown by the hulking boilers seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of her vision. She felt watched, not by a person, but by the weight of the history and secrets trapped down here. Finally, she found it, a large, cavernous room dominated by two colossal boilers. And there, on the far wall, was a large rectangular section of brickwork that was visibly different from the surrounding wall. The mortar was newer, the color of the bricks a slightly different shade. It was where the coal chute had been sealed. There was no handle, no seam, no indication of a door. To an ordinary observer, it was just a solid wall. But Ania had the blueprint in the journal. One of Silas's last entries read, "The path is not opened by force, but by order. The sequence is the key, the foundation of all things." It was a riddle. She studied the brickwork, her light tracing every line. She noticed that 5 of the bricks were different. They were darker, almost black, and set slightly deeper than the others. She pushed on one. It didn't move. She consulted the blueprint again. Beside the drawing of the wall was a series of numbers, an equation. It wasn't a combination, it was a sequence, a firing order for an engine. She cross-referenced it with a page in the journal where Silas mused on the perfect rhythm of the machine. The numbers corresponded to the firing order of a V8 engine, a marvel of engineering in his time. 1-8-4-3-6-5-7-2. But there were only 5 bricks. She reread the journal entry, the foundation of all things. She thought about the name of the company. Monarch, the number 1, the king, the first. The path is opened by force, but by order. Her mind raced. What if it wasn't the full sequence? What if it was about the foundational numbers, the prime numbers in the sequence? She looked at the firing order again, 1-8-4-3-6-5-7-2. The primes were 3, 5, and 7. And then there was the beginning and the end, 1 and 2, 5 numbers, 5 bricks. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She assigned a number to each of the dark bricks from left to right, 1 through 5. Following the prime sequence within the firing order, she had to press them in the order they appeared. Brick 1, then brick 3, then brick 5, then brick 7, then brick 2. But there were no bricks 7 and 2. She was overthinking it. It was simpler. The journal said, "The sequence is the key." She had to press the bricks that corresponded to the prime numbers in their numerical order. Brick 2, brick 3, brick 5. She tried it. She pushed the second brick from the left, then the third, and then the fifth. Nothing. She was running out of time. The air in her respirator felt thin, stale. The pressure was immense. She leaned against the wall in frustration, her headlamp illuminating the blueprint. Her eyes fell on the crown symbol again. A monarch. 5 points on the crown. 5 bricks. Silas had loved symbolism. He saw his work as a form of royalty, of sovereignty. She looked at the bricks again. What if it wasn't a numerical sequence at all, but a spatial one? A pattern. The pattern of a crown. She pressed the far left brick, or point 1, then the far right, point 2, then the middle brick, the highest point, then the one between the left and the middle, and finally the one between the right and the middle. It was a gamble, a desperate leap of intuition. She pushed the final brick. For a second, nothing happened. Then a low, grinding sound echoed from within the wall, a deep mechanical groan. A thin, vertical crack of pure darkness appeared in the center of the brickwork. The sealed wall was a door splitting down the middle, the 2 halves receding slowly into the wall. The air that flowed out from the opening was different. Not damp and mildewed, but cold, dry, and ancient. It was the sterile air of a sealed chamber. Before her was a narrow, steep staircase, carved from the raw concrete, descending into absolute blackness. This was it, the hidden path, the way to the heart. Anaya stood at the precipice, the rhythmic hiss of her own breathing the only sound. The darkness below was complete, a void that seemed to pull at the light from her headlamp. She was terrified. This was a descent into the unknown, a place no one had been in 60 years, a place the world didn't even know existed. But she had come too far to turn back now. With the blueprint in one hand and her flashlight in the other, she took the first step down into the secret heart of the Monarch factory. The air in the hidden stairwell was unnaturally still, so cold it felt sharp in Ania's lungs, even through the filters of her respirator. The concrete steps were steep and narrow, descending in a tight spiral into the earth. The beam of her headlamp cut a small, trembling circle into the oppressive darkness, revealing nothing but the rough-hewn walls of the passage. It felt like a tunnel into a forgotten age, a place outside of time. With each step down, the sounds of the world above, the distant drip of water, the faint hum of the city, faded away, replaced by a profound subterranean silence. The only sound was the crunch of her own boots on the gritty steps and the steady, amplified hiss of her own breathing. It was a lonely, claustrophobic sound that magnified her sense of isolation. She was deep underground now, far below the foundations of the factory, in a place Silas Washington had carved out of the bedrock, a secret kept for 60 years. The staircase ended abruptly, opening into a small, perfectly square chamber. The air here was even colder, and the silence was so complete it felt like a pressure against her eardrums. In the center of the far wall, illuminated by her light, was the reason for all of this. It was a vault door, but it was unlike any she had ever seen or imagined. It was a perfect circle of polished black steel, at least 10 feet in diameter, set flush into a wall of reinforced concrete. It had no handle, no keypad, no modern locking mechanism. Its surface was dominated by a complex series of concentric rings, each etched with letters, numbers, and strange alchemical-looking symbols. In the very center was a single, small, brass keyhole. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, both beautiful and terrifyingly impassive. It did not invite entry, it defied it. Ania approached it slowly, her light playing over the intricate details. This was the heart of the Monarch, the Ark, the final safeguard. She pulled the small brass key from the pocket of her hazmat suit. Her gloved hand trembled as she inserted it into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. She turned it. There was a soft, satisfying click, and with a low whirring sound, the concentric rings on the door began to glow with a soft internal light. It wasn't electric light, it was phosphorescent, a chemical glow that had been waiting for this moment, charged and ready for 6 decades. The door was awake. Now came the true test, the combination. It wasn't a simple sequence of numbers. Silas's journal made that clear. The vault answers not to a number, but to a story, he had written. Our story. Over the last few weeks, Ania had pieced it together. The combination was a series of 5 inputs, each one a riddle answered by a piece of her family's history, a history she had barely known existed until she opened his journal. The first ring was etched with letters. The clue in the journal, the name of the matriarch, the root from which we grow. Ania had to call her grandmother, then her great-aunt, digging into a past no one had spoken of for years. She finally found the name, Grace, her own middle name. The name of Silas's mother, her great-grandmother, a sharecropper's daughter from Georgia who had carried the family north during the Great Migration. Ania carefully turned the outer ring, aligning the glowing letters. Grace. A deep, resonant chime, like a single note from a massive bell, echoed in the chamber. The first tumbler had fallen. The second ring was a series of dates. The clue, the year hope was bought with blood. Silas had written about his older brother Daniel, who was killed in the Second World War. His death benefits had provided the seed money for the first machine shop that would eventually become the Monarch factory. The year of his death, 1944. Ania set the numbers, another deeper chime. The second tumbler fell. The third ring was covered in symbols, a wrench, a gear, a lightning bolt, a book. The clue was a quote. He gave me the tools, but she gave me the vision. Silas had an engineering degree, a rarity for a black man in his time, but he credited his sister, Ania's grandmother, a teacher, with pushing him to think beyond the factory floor to see the bigger picture. The wrench for his skill, the book for hers. She aligned the 2 symbols, a third chime higher than the others, 3 down. The fourth ring was a series of city names, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Philadelphia. The riddle, where the Monarch first took flight. Not the city they were in now, but where Silas had built his first typewriter prototype in a rented garage before moving the company. After hours of searching old business registries, she had found it. Philadelphia. She set the name. A fourth chime. The final ring was the most difficult. It was a star chart, a map of the night sky. The clue was the most poetic and personal, the star we followed out of the darkness. It was a reference to the Underground Railroad, to the North Star that had guided their ancestors to freedom. Ania, who had never paid much attention to the constellations, had spent hours with a star chart app on her phone identifying Polaris. She found it on the glowing ring and aligned it with a marker. For a moment, there was only silence. Ania held her breath, her heart a trip hammer in her chest. Had she gotten it right? Was 60 years of planning, a lifetime of secrets, all for nothing? Then a sound started, a low, powerful hum that seemed to come from the very rock around her. The great concentric rings on the vault door began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster. Blurring into a circle of soft light, a series of massive clicks echoed from deep within the wall, the sound of colossal locking bolts being drawn back. The hum subsided, the rotation slowed. And then, with a faint hiss of displaced air, the entire 10-foot circular door began to retract into the wall, a silent, perfect iris opening into the darkness behind it. The air that flowed out was different yet again. It was not cold or sterile. It was just still. It was the air of a place that had never known a single breath. Anaya stood frozen, bathed in the phosphorescent glow from the door's mechanism. She had done it. She had solved the riddle of Silas Washington. She had opened the heart. Her headlamp beam pierced the darkness beyond the threshold, and she took a hesitant step forward into the vault. The beam swept across the room, and what she saw made her stop, made the air catch in her throat, made the entire world outside this chamber fade into utter insignificance. It wasn't a room full of gold bars or stacks of cash, like some pirate's treasure. It was something far more potent, far more dangerous, and far more valuable. It was a library of power. The interior of the vault was not a dusty cavern, but a meticulously organized chamber, its air dry and still, preserved with an almost surgical precision. The space was about the size of a small apartment, the walls lined not with stone, but with row upon row of gleaming stainless steel shelves and cabinets. The beam of Ania's headlamp danced across the room, illuminating a scene of incredible, almost unbelievable foresight. This was not a hoard, it was an arsenal. On one wall, stacked in heavy, fireproof cases, were the bearer bonds, thousands of them. Ania pulled one case down, her hand shaking. She opened it. Inside, crisp, immaculate certificates sat nestled in velvet. They were from dozens of different governments and corporations from the 1950s and early 60s, all of them untraceable, all of them payable to whoever held them. She saw denominations of $10,000, $50,000, $100,000. A quick, frantic calculation in her head yielded a number so large it felt fictional. It was hundreds of millions of dollars in tangible, anonymous wealth. But that was only the beginning. Against the opposite wall were rows of long, sealed tubes of thick cardboard. She opened one. Inside, rolled with painstaking care, were blueprints and patent filings. She unrolled the top one. The technical drawings were dense, complex, but the title was clear: Internal Combustion Engine with Magneto-Rotational Fuel Injection. It was a design for an engine that would be orders of magnitude more efficient than anything that existed, even today. She opened another tube. Solid-state data storage matrix. It was a schematic for a form of non-volatile memory, a precursor to the flash drives and SSDs that would be invented decades later. Another held alloy composition for high-tensile, low-weight structural metal. He hadn't just been building typewriters, he had been inventing the future, and instead of selling it, he had buried it. He had created a treasure chest of intellectual property that could, if released today, upend entire industries. The potential value was incalculable. In a series of locked file drawers, she found deeds to vast tracts of land, not in the city, but in places that would have been remote, worthless backwaters in 1963. 100 acres in a dusty valley outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. A stretch of coastline in a forgotten corner of Florida. A huge parcel of land in the hills near a small California town called Cupertino. Ania felt a wave of dizziness. She leaned against a shelf for support. This was the true scale of Silas's vision. He hadn't just been preserving wealth. He had been planting seeds, making bets on the future of a country he profoundly distrusted. He had bought the land that would one day become the heart of the Sun Belt, of Silicon Valley, of luxury resorts. The total value of the land, the patents, the bonds, it was staggering. $534 million was a conservative estimate. It was likely much, much more. In the very center of the room, on a simple steel pedestal, sat a single heavy cast iron box. It was not locked. Ania lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded black silk, was a single stack of papers and a photograph. The photograph was of a young boy smiling, holding a small model airplane. On the back, an inscription in Silas's hand, "For Marcus, may you fly higher." Ania stared at the photo, tears welling in her eyes, fogging the inside of her faceplate. He had known. Somehow, he had known his legacy would pass to a future generation, to a child he would never meet. He had been thinking of her son. The papers were a letter, a final testament in his elegant, precise script. To the custodian, it began. If you are reading this, then you have proven yourself worthy. You have followed the path I laid and unlocked the heart of my life's work. You have my eyes. You have my will. What you see around you is not a treasure to be spent. It is a tool. It is a weapon. I built this company with my own two hands in a world that was designed to see me fail. I learned early that the rules of their system are not for us. Their banks can fail. Their governments can seize. Their markets can collapse. Their promises are written on sand. Therefore, I have created a foundation outside their grasp. This vault contains the three pillars of true independence: capital that cannot be traced, land that cannot be moved, and ideas that cannot be uninvented. I have sealed it away from a world I could not trust, in the hopes that a future generation, your generation, might be strong enough to wield it. Do not be a king or a queen counting your gold. Be a custodian. Be a builder. Use this power not for mansions or for vanity, but to create your own system. Build businesses that employ our people. Fund scholarships. Buy back our communities. Create a legacy of ownership that they cannot touch. The world outside this vault will try to take this from you. They will come with their laws, their taxes, and their false promises. Do not trust them. The monarch factory above you is a shell, a decoy. It is filled with poison to keep the jackals at bay. The real monarch is here with you, in this room. This is your birthright. This is your burden. Do not fail me. Do not fail the generations to come. Ania sat on the cold steel floor of the vault, the letter in her hands, and wept. She wept for the man she never knew, for his genius, his anger, his magnificent, lonely vision. She wept for the weight of the burden he had just placed on her shoulders. She was no longer just Ania Washington, a struggling single mother. She was the custodian, the inheritor of a secret empire, a $500 million responsibility. The hiss of her respirator was the only sound. She looked around the vault at the incredible concentration of wealth and power. Silas was right. The world would try to take this. Ms. Albright and the city were already at the gates. The 30-day clock was still ticking. But now she was not unarmed. She was not a victim. She was armed with capital, land, and ideas. She was armed with the legacy of Silas Washington. She carefully placed the letter back in the box, closed the lid, and stood up. The fear and uncertainty were gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve she recognized from the portrait in Silas's office. The game had changed. The fight was just beginning. Ania emerged from the factory that evening as a different woman. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the derelict landscape of the industrial park. She sealed the hidden entrance behind her, the heavy brick door sliding shut with a groan of finality, and walked out of the main gates, leaving the tomb and its treasure behind. But she did not leave the legacy. She carried it with her in the fierce, newfound set of her jaw, in the purpose that now burned behind her eyes. The weight of the secret was immense, a physical pressure in her chest, but it was not the crushing weight of despair anymore. It was the solid, grounding weight of power. The next morning, she did not go to her job at the grocery store. She called in, her voice calm and steady, and quit. She did the same with the cleaning service. The disbelief on the other end of the line was palpable, but Ania felt nothing but a profound sense of release. She was done with that life. She would bun surviving. It was time to start building. Her first act as the custodian was not to cash a bond or hire a lawyer. It was to sit down at her kitchen table with Marcus. She looked at her son, at his bright, curious eyes, and saw the future Silas had written about. She told him a story, a simplified version of the truth, about a long-lost relative who was a secret inventor, a king who had built a castle and left it for them to protect. She told him their lives were about to change, but that their values would not, that what they had been given was not just for them, but for others. He was young, but he understood the gravity in her voice. He saw the change in her, the strength, and he nodded, his expression serious. Her next call was to Mr. Henderson. She told him she had found it. The old man was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line, and she could hear him quietly weeping. "He did it, Mr. Henderson finally whispered. "That magnificent man. He actually did it." Ania spent the next week in a whirlwind of meticulous planning. She took one of the smaller bearer bonds for $10,000 to a discreet financial services firm in another state, a place that specialized in untraceable assets. The money was in her new bank account within hours, a small seed from which she would grow an army. With that initial capital, she retained not just one lawyer, but a team. She didn't hire a local attorney who might be intimidated by the city. She hired a top-tier environmental law firm from New York, a group of legal predators known for taking on municipalities and winning. When she walked into their gleaming downtown office for the first time, they saw a determined woman in a simple coat, but they heard the voice of a client with unlimited resources and an iron will. The day of the preliminary seizure hearing arrived. It was held in a sterile, impersonal courtroom in the municipal building, and Ania sat at the defendant's table, flanked by two of her lawyers, both looking sharp and predatory in their $1,000 suits. On the other side of the aisle sat Ms. Genevieve Albright from the EPD, looking smug and confident, her own city attorney shuffling papers beside her. But she was not alone. Next to her sat a man Ania had never seen before. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair, an expensive suit, and the predatory, reptilian stillness of a crocodile. He watched Ania with an unnerving, calculating gaze. Albright's lawyer presented the city's case. It was simple, brutal, and on its face unassailable. The Monarch factory was a clear and present danger to public health. The owner, Ms. Washington, was a woman of no means, incapable of financing the multi-million-dollar cleanup. Therefore, the city had a duty to seize the property for the public good. It was all very clean, very bureaucratic. Then, the man in the expensive suit was introduced. His name was Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Development Group. He was, the city's lawyer explained, a civic partner. Sterling took the stand and spoke in smooth, reasonable tones. He explained that his company was prepared to purchase the condemned property from the city after the seizure. They would absorb the cost of the remediation themselves as part of a larger urban renewal project. He painted a picture of gleaming office towers and luxury condos where the old poison factory now stood. It was a vision of progress, of profit. He even made a show of magnanimity. Furthermore, Sterling said, looking directly at Ania, his eyes full of false pity, in recognition of Ms. Washington's unfortunate circumstances, Sterling Development is prepared to offer her a compassionate payment of $100,000 to help her get back on her feet. The offer hung in the air. It was a pittance, an insult, a tiny fraction of the land's true value without the factory on it. But to the Ania of a month ago, it would have been a life-changing fortune. It was the easy way out, the temptation. Take the money, be free of the burden, walk away. Albright and Sterling were watching her, expecting her to buckle, to show relief, to gratefully accept the scraps from their table. This was the system Silas had warned her about. the powerful taking what they wanted, dressing it up as civic duty and compassion. Ania leaned forward and whispered to her lead attorney. He nodded, a grim smile on his face. When it was their turn, he stood up. Your Honor, he began, his voice filling the courtroom. My client, Ms. Washington, rejects Mr. Sterling's generous offer. A murmur went through the room. Albright and Sterling exchanged a look of surprise and annoyance. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, we are here today to inform the court that Ms. Washington has every intention of complying with the city's remediation order. In fact, she has already retained the services of an international environmental cleanup firm and is prepared to place the full estimated cost of remediation, $20 million, into an escrow account by the end of this week. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Albright's jaw literally dropped. Sterling's calm reptilian mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flicker of pure predatory fury. He had not anticipated this. He had seen a poor, helpless woman, an easy mark. He had not seen a queen with a hidden army. That's preposterous, the city's attorney stammered. Where would she get that kind of money? Ania's lawyer smiled. My client's finances are her own business, counsel. Suffice it to say, the legacy of Silas Washington was far more substantial than you or your civic partners at Sterling Development assumed. Ania looked across the aisle and met Arthur Sterling's wums. The false pity was gone, replaced by a cold, hard glare of respect and animosity. He saw her now, not as a victim, but as an obstacle, as a player. The judge, looking bewildered but intrigued, postponed the hearing, pending proof of the escrow deposit. The first battle was over. Ania had not just survived, she had won. She had stood up to the system and beaten it at its own game. As she walked out of the courtroom, the weight on her shoulders felt different again. It was no longer a burden, it was a crown. The $20 million flowed into the escrow account as promised, a silent, titanic shockwave that rocked the foundations of the city's bureaucracy. The news spread like wildfire through the municipal building. The seizure hearing was canceled. The stop work orders were rescinded. The city, faced with a property owner who was not only willing but hyper-capitalized to handle the problem, had no choice but to retreat. Ms. Albright called once, her voice stripped of its former arrogance, replaced by a strained, formal courtesy. She was now dealing not with a nuisance, but with a power player. Arthur Sterling, however, did not retreat. He adapted. His strategy shifted from a legal seizure to a corporate acquisition. He began a campaign, a subtle war fought in boardrooms and back channels. Ania started receiving calls, first from real estate brokers, then from development consortiums, all fronting for Sterling, offering to buy the property. The offers grew steadily, from $25 million to $50, then $100 million. They were staggering sums of money, enough to guarantee a life of unimaginable luxury for her and Marcus for the rest of their days. Each offer was a temptation, a siren song whispering of an easy life, free from the burdens of the factory, free from the weight of Silas's legacy. But Ania remembered the words in the letter. Do not be a king or a queen counting your gold. Be a custodian. Be a builder. Every time she was tempted, she would look at the photograph of the young boy, the stand-in for her own son, and she would find her resolve again. She refused every offer, her rejections becoming colder and more final each time. She knew Sterling saw the factory only for the land it sat on. He wanted to erase it, to pave over the history and the legacy to build his glass towers. For him, it was an asset. For Ania, it was sacred ground. The cleanup began. Ania hired the best environmental remediation company in the world. They descended on the factory in a fleet of white trucks, erecting a massive sealed containment structure over the entire building. For months, teams of workers in full-body hazmat suits moved through the silent halls, painstakingly removing every fiber of the poison that had kept the world at bay for 60 years. Ania supervised the process from a temporary office set up in a trailer outside the containment zone. She was there every day, from dawn until dusk. She studied the blueprints, both the city's and Silas's secret ones. She learned about engineering, about architecture, about the history of the building's construction. She walked the decontaminated floors as they were cleared, room by room, feeling the factory slowly coming back to life. She brought Mr. Henderson to the site one day. The old man, his eyes wet with tears, walked through the now safe factory floor, touching the silent machines. "He would be so proud of you, child," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not just cleaning his house, you're waking it up." While the physical cleaning was underway, Anaya began the second phase of her plan. She used another portion of the vault's capital to form a legal and financial entity, a trust, which she named the Monarch Foundation. Its charter was built around the principles in Silas's letter: to foster innovation, create economic opportunity, and build generational wealth within the community. She began to discreetly acquire the patents from the vault, transferring them into the foundation's name. She hired a team of patent lawyers and technology experts to analyze the trove of ideas Silas had hidden away. Their reports were staggering. The patents for the engine, the data storage, and the alloys were not just viable, they were revolutionary. They were the keys to new industries. Arthur Sterling, realizing his frontal assault had failed, tried a new tactic. He began a public relations war. Articles appeared in the local business journals, quoting anonymous city sources who worried about a secretive and inexperienced new player. Sterling gave interviews, positioning himself as a champion of progress, painting Aniai as a hoarder of a valuable city asset, someone who was standing in the way of jobs and development. He was trying to turn the city against her, to isolate her. But Anaya did not engage him in the press. She worked in silence, letting her actions speak for her. The day the remediation was officially completed, the containment structure came down. The Monarch Typewriter Company stood once again under an open sky, its bricks scrubbed clean, its windows replaced, gleaming in the sun. It was no longer a tomb. It was a blank canvas. That same day, Anaya called a press conference. It was held on the front steps of the factory. Every local news outlet was there, drawn by the mystery and the rumors that had been swirling for months. Arthur Sterling was there too, standing at the back of the crowd, a smug, expectant look on his face, waiting to see what the amateur would do. Anaya, flanked by her lawyers and Mr. Henderson, stepped up to the podium. She was not the same woman who had trembled before Ms. Albright. She was poised, confident, her voice clear and strong as it carried over the assembled crowd. She told them the story of her great-uncle, Silas Washington, a visionary who had built an empire. She told them of his distrust of a system that had failed him. And then she laid out her vision, not for a building, but for a future. "The Monarch Typewriter Company is not for sale," she announced, her eyes finding Sterling in the crowd. "It will not be torn down to make way for luxury condos. Instead, it will be reborn. Today, I am proud to announce the launch of the Monarch Innovation Campus." She went on to describe her plan. The factory would be converted into a state-of-the-art tech incubator and research facility. The Monarch Foundation would provide seed funding and mentorship to minority and women-led startups. They would focus on developing the very patents Silas Washington had created decades ago, bringing his revolutionary ideas to life. It would create hundreds of high-paying jobs, not just for construction, but for engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs. It was a plan that was not just about profit, but about purpose. It was a direct fulfillment of Silas's final command: build, create, own. The reporters were stunned, scribbling furiously. Arthur Sterling's face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and publicly defeated. He had tried to buy a piece of land, but Anaya had inherited a mission. As the press conference ended, Anaya saw Marcus standing near the steps with Mrs. Gable. He was looking up at her, his eyes wide with awe and pride. She walked over to him and knelt down, pulling him into a hug. "What you've done, Anaya," Mrs. Gable said, her voice filled with emotion. "It's a miracle." Anaya looked up at the vast, reborn factory, its name once again a symbol not of decay, but of defiance and hope. "No," Anaya said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's a legacy." She took Marcus's hand. Together, the custodian and the future she was building for him, they walked toward the open doors of the factory, ready to begin the real work. The silence was finally broken. The ghost in the machine was at peace. The Monarch was ready to write its next chapter.